Today, I will spend my time talking about reliability and life prediction of lithium-ion batteries. So why battery life prediction? Why do we care about it? This is a slide I borrowed from Dr. Jeff Dunn at Dalhousie University in Canada. Lithium-ion batteries are amazing, both because they are used almost everywhere and because of their long lifetime. Lithium-ion batteries have been demonstrated to last around 3 years in phone, consumer electronics, more than 80 years in EV, electric vehicles, and around 10 years in implantable medical devices. But they eventually die, and that's a problem. So in this talk, we will look at the capacity fade, which is a natural expected degradation. We are not looking at the unexpected catastrophic failures, such as internal shorting. So let's take a close look at lithium-ion batteries in implantable applications. In these applications, lithium-ion batteries are used as power sources for two types of neuromodulation devices: spinal cord stimulators on the left and deep brain stimulators on the right. And each of these devices has a single lithium-ion battery as the power source. So the battery has a capacity of a few hundred milliampere hour. This is a much smaller cell than the cells used in our cell phones, which typically have a capacity of several thousand milliampere hour. So this is a much smaller cell. So the battery chemistry, lithium coal oxide is used as active material in the positive electrode. The graphite is on the negative side. The battery is targeted for a calendar life of 10 years. The cycle life can be a few hundred to a few thousand cycles, depending on the use condition. Okay, so now let's look at some data. The question is, how long can these batteries last? So here is a plot of capacity fade data from actual tests under 37 degrees C body temperature. In these tests, we repeatedly charge and discharge a battery cell to make the cell age in an accelerated manner. So on this plot, we are looking at the normalized capacity in percent on the Y and the time on test on the X. Okay, so by the way, capacity, for some of you who are not familiar with lithium-ion batteries, is a direct measure of battery health. That's why we look at the capacity here. So if you look at the blue squares, which are the cells that go through a full charge-discharge cycle every day, we see that the capacity goes down with time. And this is a phenomenon called capacity fade or capacity degradation. We also see that this is a very slow process, which takes years on these implantable-grade cells. As you can see, if you look at on the far right side of the figure, at 10 years, these cells still had more than 70% of their initial capacity. Now, what are we trying to do here? We simply want to diagnose the degradation mechanisms that drive capacity fade. Okay, so in the interest of time, I will not talk about battery life prediction. Instead, I will focus on battery degradation diagnostics in this talk. Now we are going to look at a second aging data set. To collect this data set, my group at Iowa State University tested the implantable-grade cells that we looked at earlier. So it's a busy slide, but what we have here is we have actual tests, data from actual tests that began in 2017. Okay, so for we have two temperatures, 37 degrees C body temperature, 55 degrees C elevated temperature. So for each temperature, we have two discharge rates, C/24 and C/3. Okay, so 0/24 means a battery cell can be fully discharged in 24 hours. Okay, so a fully charged cell can be fully discharged in 24 hours. That is a day. And 0/3 means the cell can be fully discharged in 3 hours. So much faster discharge than 0/3. So in the previous slide, you have seen cell level capacity fade. Now the question becomes, can we go inside the cell and look at what is driving capacity fade at the electrode and the electrolyte level? If we do that, we'll see 3 degradation modes reported in the battery literature. As a cell is being charged and discharged repeatedly, it loses active materials in its cathode or positive electrode and anode or negative electrode. It also loses lithium inventory in the electrolyte. So we can easily define 3 degradation parameters, which you see on the left, to quantify the degradation modes. So we have cathode active mass, anode active mass, and lithium inventory indicator. So now what we want to do is to estimate what is driving the capacity fade behind the scene. So we estimated these 3 degradation parameters, and that is step 1. Once we quantify the degradation modes, we map the estimated parameters to capacity. Okay, so that's our step 2. So in essence, we not only estimate the degradation modes, understanding the degradation mechanisms, we also estimate the cell level capacity. Now, how to estimate these 3 degradation parameters? So we look at it. By the way, it's not an easy task. It's very, very difficult. What my group did was we look at the differential capacity or DQ/dV curve. Okay, so the idea is to take the first order derivative of capacity Q with respect to voltage V. Okay, so essentially we have dQ divided by dQ/dV. Okay, so what you see here are 4 simulated dQ/dV versus voltage V curves. Okay, using a physics-based half-cell model. So the black represents a fresh cell with minimum degradation, and the other 3 curves, blue, red, and green, each representing an aged cell. Okay, with a 20% reduction in active mass or lithium inventory. Okay, so in essence, we basically perturb each of the 3 degradation parameters by 20%, and we see how much change it's going to bring to the DQ/dV curve. So as you can see, the shape of the curves, changes, right, with each degradation parameters. Now the question becomes, can we infer the 3 degradation parameters which we cannot measure from the differential capacity curve, DQ/dV curve, which we can measure? So that's a question we want to answer. So let's formulate this problem a little bit. So we have DQ/dV curves from simulation. Okay, we also have the curves from some early life experiments. We also have those curves in late life experiments. Okay. So making things more clear, we have the simulation data, the gray, okay, early life experimental data, the red, okay, and the late life experimental data, the blue. Okay. Now each of these rows represents the DQ/dV curves and the degradation parameters at a certain degradation state of one cell. Okay. So we take the simulation data and early life experimental data. Now we have a training data set. Okay. We assume that it's too expensive to perform long-term aging experiments. So we do not have access to the late life data for training. Okay. So we use the late life data only for testing a trained model. So if we look at the degradation parameter space in the bottom left, we simulate DQDV curves in regions of high degradation. So as you will see later, the intent is to help machine learning models extrapolate beyond the training distribution, which concentrates on early life low degradation regions. Okay. So now, how to train machine learning models for degradation diagnostics, right? The simplest way is to use only early life experimental data, which we have access to. So no use of physics-based simulation data. Okay, that's the simplest approach. Now, an alternative approach is to augment the training data set, okay, by including the simulation data. Okay, and this augmented data set will contain more information about the degradation path, okay, than was learnable from only using the early life experimental data. Okay, so in this way, we incorporate degradation physics, okay, into the data-driven models. Another alternative is so-called delta learning. Okay, it's a little more involved than augmentation, data augmentation. So here we start with a machine learning model. Okay, we call machine learning estimation model, and the model is trained using simulation data only. Okay. However, we found that the simulation is largely imperfect and does not accurately represent the experimental data, okay, especially for heavily aged cells. And the reason being that the simulation model is really a simplified physics-based model. To mitigate this issue, we train a corrector machine learning model that learns the prediction error of the estimation model, right? So we train using light degradation data. Okay, the idea is the corrector model learns the estimation model's bias from the early life experimental data. Okay, and the final prediction is the addition of the estimation and corrector models. Okay, so so in my view, both augmentation and delta learning can be viewed as physics-informed machine learning. Okay, so the idea is we incorporate a largely imperfect physics to help data-driven machine learning models to extrapolate, okay, beyond the distribution of the data the models are trained on. Okay, so that's really the essential idea. So let's look at some test results. First, let's look at two machine learning models, multi-output Gaussian process and extreme learning machine. Okay, so we compare the prediction root mean square errors in percent, okay, of three different approaches: baseline, augmentation, and delta learning. Okay, so so if we compare the three, we see that data augmentation was more effective in improving the accuracy over baseline, right? If you look at the mean prediction errors. But the bottom line is both physics-informed machine learning approaches are effective. So both augmentation and delta learning are effective. So if we look at ElasticNet, both approaches are very effective. Okay, so by adding physics-based simulation data, we see on average a 50% reduction in the prediction error over the baseline. So here are basically some plots showing the degradation parameter estimate versus time on test. So the first column is for the positive active mass. Second one is for the negative active mass. The third column is for the lithium inventory indicator, and the fourth column is for the battery capacity. Okay. It's a busy slide. It's a busy slide, but let's just look at one plot. So as you can see, for this particular cell, this is cell 1 in group number 4. Okay, and if we look at the late stage of degradation, we can see that physics-informed machine learning model, which is denoted as augmentation, okay, extrapolates much better than the baseline model, okay, which does not use physics-based simulation model. So in essence, adding even largely imperfect physics can help machine learning models extrapolate, which is often desirable. Now let's look at a different question, a more challenging one. Professor O, how much time do I have?
I think we have 9 more minutes, including Q&A.
9 more minutes. Okay. I will try. So if a battery cell is still relatively fresh and shows negligible capacity fade, can we predict when the cell is likely to reach its end of life? Okay, so it's a very challenging problem. So let's first look at a third aging data set. On the left, you see a capacity fade plot for 124 automotive lithium-ion cells. And these cells were cycled under fast charging conditions, okay? The cycle life varies depending on the exact charging condition. You can see there is a pretty wide range of cycle life from 250 cycles to more than 2,000 cycles. Now, what's the problem we are trying to solve? So taking one cell from the data set, we want to use data from only the first 100 cycles to predict cycle life. Okay, that is the number of cycles to 80% of the nominal capacity. So that's something not easy at all, right? So now the question is, given the data from cycling a cell for only 100 times, how can we know when the cell will reach its end of life, which could be more than 1,000 cells? So that's really an early prediction problem we are trying to solve. If we zoom in to see how the cell performs in the first 100 cycles, so we can see the capacity fade curve is very flat. And if we feed any model to this data and do prediction, we are not going to get meaningful results, right? We would under-predict fade and over-predict life with very large errors. So to tackle this challenge, we take a different approach. So far, we have been looking at capacity data. Now, let's look at what we measure directly from the cell, voltage and current. Okay, so we measure these every second or a few seconds. With these raw measurements, we can build voltage V versus capacity Q curves. Okay, so we are looking at these curves in 2 early cycles, cycle 10 and cycle 100. So we calculate the capacity difference, okay, between these 2 curves at each voltage reading. Then we can build this capacity difference versus voltage curve, right? So far, we have basically simple math. Now, what we can do is we can actually calculate the variance of the capacity difference, right? This will allow us to quantify the spread of this difference. And this variance becomes our early life feature, okay? So we know the cycle life of this cell, so we can plot this combination of life and feature. This is just one point, nothing to be super excited about. What if we look at a different cell? We basically repeat the process, and now we have another point, which has higher cycle life, okay? Still nothing stands out. Let's keep going. Pick a third cell. We again repeat the process. We get one more data point on the red figure. You can see we are starting to see some really interesting things. Okay, the cycle life seems to be correlated with this early cycle feature. Now let's look at all cells and see how this would play out. So we have the the data for all 124 cells. Okay, so the magic line here is you see how strongly the cycle life is correlated with this early life feature, right? In the figure on the right. Now the question becomes, can we take advantage of this, the predictive power of early life features, and train a machine learning model that maps to cycle life? So we started by collecting data. In 2017 and 2018, the authors of the Nature Energy paper down below collected aging data from 3 batches of cells, in total 124 cells. Now we define the training and test data set. Okay, we take some cells from the first batch and some cells from the same batch. Now we have a training data set with 41 cells. Okay, and each row represents the early life features and the cycle life of one cell. Okay, and one of these features is the variance feature we looked at earlier. Okay, just reminder, this feature has some predictive power, which we can leverage to predict cycle life. And then similarly, we take cells from the first 2 batches and define a primary test data set. And then we define a secondary test data set. The idea is now we are going to train, give a machine learning model, a machine learning algorithm, some training data, some observations of early life features and cycle life. We are going to then let the algorithm try and have a way to generate a mathematical model that will infer something about the underlying process that generated a training data set. So we have really a set of machine learning models to choose from. And then using the trained model, we want to be able to make predictions about cells the model hasn't seen before, okay? So now we can then compare the cycle life predictions with observations to derive some performance metrics. For example, the root mean square error. So now let's switch gears and solve a different early prediction problem. Instead of predicting a cycle life, which is a single value for each cell, can we predict the entire capacity trajectory? And this is how the prediction looks like. To do that, we couple a machine learning model with a capacity fit model. Okay, and I'm gonna probably skip. So you know, from the early 100 cycles, we extract early life features. Okay, really, basically, we compare the voltage versus capacity curves of cycle 10 and cycle 100. And we have an example feature, which is the variance feature we looked at earlier. Okay, and now we feed these early life features into a machine learning model, which then predicts, instead of cycle life, the parameters of a capacity fit model. Okay. Now, what is a capacity fit model? Here is a power law model we chose for this study. The model input is the cycle number K. The model output is the capacity Q. Okay, the model parameters are A and B, which are predicted by the machine learning model. Okay, so let's keep moving. So the machine learning model predicts A and B. Okay, and the empirical model takes in the A and B prediction from the machine learning model and predicts the capacity trajectory. Okay, capacity Q versus cycle number K. If we think about it a bit further, what we are building is essentially an augmented machine learning model that uses a capacity fit model as an additional layer of modeling. Okay, and this way, the augmented model incorporates prior knowledge of the capacity fit trend. Remember, we also have observed capacity trajectory from this training cell, so we can compare the prediction with the observation and train our augmented model to minimize this difference. And in the interest of time, I'm gonna skip the results part. So I can have some time for questions. This
Okay.
is.
Thanks very much for your nice, excellent presentation. I'm very impressed that your work is incorporated machine learning and as well as physics in your prediction model. Okay, so we have one or two questions from the audience. Any question? Okay, Professor O, please.
Hello, Professor Chao. I'm Gi-Yong Oh from Hanyang University. Nice to meet you again.
Hi, Professor O.
Yeah. Thank you for great presentation. I have one simple question. So in the first topic, you used the extreme learning model. So is there any reason that you used that model? So I'm just wondering whether that is outperform the other deep learning models such as LSTM or convolution neural network.
Very good question, Professor O. In the first case study, we actually have a very small data set. Okay, so we have probably less than 200 data points. So we try to avoid using deep learning models because of the small data size. We did try deep learning models. We tried a convolutional neural network models, but we did not get very good results there. The reason why we chose extreme learning machine was because it's very simple to train. And we found that ELM in some cases can outperform some other simple shallow machine learning models, such as ElasticNet. So that's why we included ELM in the algorithm pool. We actually also tried Lasso, but I did not include the results here. So by including different machine learning models or algorithms, we try to show our approach is agnostic of machine learning algorithm you want to use. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. I'm totally agree with you. Which one is better totally depends on the type of data, number of data, etc. Right?
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. I have one question. When you are doing data augmentation, in my imagination, for images, you can rotate, flip, or adding some noises to images. But I'm wondering how you can augment data for your data set.
So thanks, Professor O, for this question. When we so the input to our machine learning model is the so-called differential capacity curves. Okay, differential capacity curve, and we have access to a simplified physics-based model, so-called half-cell model, that can basically simulate the differential capacity curve as a function of degradation parameters, okay, which we want to predict. So, but the question becomes, which simulation data would be most beneficial to helping machine learning models extrapolate?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we tried different things. We actually, first we started with generating a large number of simulation data covering the entire design space, okay, uniformly distributed, but that did not help much. So the key here is, if you look at this plot, we have early life degradation data, okay, the training data, okay, in this region, we call light degradation region. But the model the machine learning models have not seen anything in the heavy degradation region. So we try to generate a simulation data in this high degradation region, such that the model understands where how to extrapolate.
I see.
So we found that generating high degradation data is most beneficial.
I see. So you are using physics-based model to generate some data at the end of the life, and then you use to train your machine learning model. Am I right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
You are absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Great, fantastic. Okay. I think due to the time limitation, unfortunately, we will have to wrap up your talk. I appreciate very much for your excellent presentation.